I used to wonder at how the intuitiveness of something that connects, disconnects and moves be met with such denial by that which takes at face value enough to ask why that misunderstanding might not be a cause for it. But the truth is more poignant than that. We grasp in ways that negate that we are still patrons of time, face values, and that we project our natures onto nature in a sense that makes uncomfortable that there are measures of these natures and the things that simply are when we are talking about things unusual, elusively qualitative about us biospherically, let alone ourselves. I feel like 20 years ago what one would have referred to as being awake could have been afforded to a more wonder-oriented observation, more confused and questioning youth and angst. After that, a more typical and arrived at relationship to our surroundings. A rat race going nowhere. We understood that at the time subjectivity, the premise of being a witness to the world around us whilst knowing, at least in principle, that, in the mundane and the mad, something was not quite right. The ominousness is hailing that which is by nature indifferent, and domineering. That power in question often in consensus to its identity if not simply real. A kid existed at the permission to question at least. Their ability to harbor an insight now and later something we put some faith in. Fate would know that we would protest whilst being the expression of something else in the process of understanding. But I finally have my own realization at that. Not in a thorough sense. Not always, although understandable. But in synonym with what we live amidst and create in time, we are still a people in the world that changed, and we are the ones coming to be the foresight and existence amidst that change, our means and time host to us, and that which we assume is in our grasp whilst forgetting the rest of it exists, is still perhaps the insight if not appreciable. Recognizing nature aside. And domain in relationship. Shit, it's a constant in us. But there is still the grasping and echo-chambering voices with which the world as it is not an example of foresight and age has an overconfidence and a horizon. The brimstone and the ladders, and the happiness sold. As it would have it to live in the time when hearing "wake the fuck up" is said seemingly by everything and everyone whom are themselves at varying positions of time trying to make sense of itself. Without sounding totally arrogant, I come to know something in foresight. Confessionally, I began believing in an ominousness. I come from a conspiracy theorist's lectures at its weirdest, looked around, but not very actively, knowing perhaps in passing that a two-party system was two sides of a constantly flipping coin. The trivial is the concern in public life around you at times, but then I understood human life in terms of itself, and our predicaments in terms of that which has momentary masters, not in foresight. Why we self-inflict in the burden and circumstance and position we could possibly be in to be anything other than ourselves figuring it out. I knew of at least that new humility. I actually don't care about secret societies, I have other things to consider. Still, indifference is real. And so is malice, and control. And it doesn't want to be a patron to the impermanent. As awakenings go though, as an entity in time. What we go through are moments of enabling, perspective, maybe some accomplishment to stay, but in the impressing of ourselves unto ourselves, there is fallacy in time. What we think of in our higher consciousness, when those moments seemingly imply our ascendancy in motion, our process shifts and re-immerses by the generation. They are short-lived. What change, leaves wake in that consciousness that is compensating for it, whatever it is we are coming to impasse or perspective with, when what we become aware of when we previously weren't confronts us. If there is anything I have learned about the consequences of awakening, it's that it doesn't happen with a grandeur, it happens with a growing pain, and even then, what we see one day, maybe not even anything but the result on circumstances terms, when time looks back at it. That wasn't the reason there wasn't a grandeur though. We are a burdened form of life coming to grasp with itself. And there's an "I told you so" for me in the process of that which is going to make choices, where we are as a species and needing to be there, before it's in the position to say that. So the two rules here. I am here to learn about this in isolation, and in motion. Secondly, you will not see it all be justified in one lifetime. But you will see it try. If there is anything I understand now, is that time and people will move with decades. And if I'm going to be witness to it, that it's better that I understand why it's better to be teacher and witnesser. To be old in this sense, and be told I stick up for nothing, a patience. But I don't want to be politically active when I'm dying. To be 33 and claim you have nothing to understand anymore is fundamentally arrogant, but maybe it was time to go given my lot. What it meant for civilization as opposed to a lone person to come to awareness meant different and yet straighter things. Figuring out who you are, what you are, under the most eventual circumstances, when this perhaps finds most of its opportunity in that which one was amidst in the world that didn't possess the ability to necessarily tell you who you were. Perhaps all that is, in moment and magnitude, is put into perspective, at least as a contemplator of it. Maybe experience in what we were in the meantime a given otherwise. I'm not defined in isolation. Addiction to the symbol, not the whole of life, life in between a given necessity and life could be adjacent. To take life at least half as seriously as you know the experience of parts of it, and get to the top of a ladder, and realize something still wasn't right. So not too seriously otherwise. This would be all well and good for someone making insights on the difference between career and work, purpose and the rest of their life, as we like to berate people for, were it not for how this too is inconvenient in self-awareness. We don't see a class being terribly conscious, despite wanting to define the world. The momentary incapacity making higher and lower relativism as well. Having thoughts and knowing them is here and there most of the time. Being at point and knowing things and not being terribly at awareness at the same time. Our circumstance wasn't cut and dry right away. It would seem that higher consciousness is presented strictly in terms of whatever it was someone was in circumstance and what everything else was not. Aptitude relative to another enables all malleability. Worlds of knowledge aside. Interposition upon reality is their mastery. There are perhaps more immediate and understandable definitions of what higher consciousness means apart from these ones, if not that. I won't get too posturing, but some of the ways we might begin to describe this might begin with an acceptance of what is, in nature, and even the strange and unobligatory about people. Maybe it's less daunting. It's to be able to free associate with your life a process. Perhaps it's to be as aware enough to explain other people in terms in their distress rather in terms of how it affects you. An awareness that is, on a scale of time and civilization, maybe foresight in what we find worth posturing over given the momentary, affords less undermining of resolves towards life. When enough has happened for us to decide that a little more confidently. But hardship will show that first.